Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to Dev Interrupted. This is your host, Dan Lyons, co-founder at Linear B, and today we're joined by Kaspar von Grünberg, founder and CEO at Humanitec. Kaspar, welcome to the show.
Dan, thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome to have you here today. Before we got on, kind of prepping for the episode here, I checked out your LinkedIn profile. I'm like, okay, who is this Kaspar? Under your name, you have platform engineering with a heart, as they do now, right?
Cheesy, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, I liked it. So I knew, okay, this is going to be like a pretty cool conversation. You're the CEO, you're the founder at Humanitec. We're going to get into all of that. You're doing some really, I think, cool things in the platform engineering space. For me at Linear B, we also have a lot of platform eng, DevOps people using our platform. So we kind of have some synergies there. What I wanted to start out with is, I think for a lot of people, platform engineering, we heard of DevOps forever now. Platform engineering, can't really tell, is it a buzzword or it's an actual, career? Let's start there of how would you define platform engineering?
Sure. So platform engineering for me is the platform engineering team is the team that looks at all of the tech and tools that your company has and then treats them as a product and says, if we think of our user, the user is the developer, how do we need to structure those tools? How do we need to organize everything to bind them into delightful golden paths that they can use, that are reliable, that they can actually consume with low cognitive load, and they can reach what they want to reach, right? Write great code, build great business logic without actually having to wait for operations tickets or understand complex, Terraform code. That's what you need platform engineering for.
And why do you think it's kind of heating up right now? You see people putting it in their titles. I'm a platform engineer now. You see people writing about it. Why do you think it's a hot topic?
I think two answers. Answer number one, there is an underlying trend, if you want. If you look at the uptake of cloud native, if you want, right? You had the 2006 Werner Vogel says in a blog post, you build it, you run it.
Yeah.
Amazon starts, all of these things. And but if you look at when the majority of teams actually get mainstream cloud native, that's like 2019, 2020. Think about when was EKS available in the rest of the world? I think that was 2019 or early 2019. So if we look at a team, or if we look at the large teams that have been cloud native for a while, Google, GitHub, internal, Airbnb, after a couple of years, they all realize, oh, that shit is complex. That idea of let's just throw everything at the developer, that doesn't fly. The FTP request worlds, at times they're over. It's really complex. We got to build a platform.
Yeah.
And there is this moment 2017 where Jason Warner, the SVP engineering at Heroku, moves over to GitHub and looks at the situation and says, this is really inefficient. It doesn't make sense. And starts building a Heroku, but on top of, I think, Amazon. And to a certain degree, that's the start of what we now call an internal developer platform.
Yeah.
And that's reason number one. Reason number two, a lot of us have spent a lot of time starting to articulate that. So when we started the term internal developer platform, that didn't exist. Platform engineering, barely. A lot of these terms are very new. And we said, okay, well, let's actually get that ball rolling. And we spent a lot of time working with different folks to articulate that and say hey, this is more than a buzzword. It's more than a title. And we built these large communities, and they're really large now. PlatformCon this year, I think we just got the numbers. We were expecting 150, 200 proposals. I think we, in the end, got 500 or something. And we're expecting over 15,000 people. And, this is really a rolling ball.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I see it as well. It's complexity is increasing for developers. And the way that you kind of described it, or what I see, is like we have a tendency to swing the pendulum to say, okay, we want developers to do everything more and more and more on the developer, which gives you some efficiency until it hits a tipping point where it doesn't. Okay, the more that a developer can do, the better until a certain point, and then their time starts degrading. That's when you start seeing like, oh, like this like developer toil, this and that. You start hearing complaints internally for developers. Hey, there's like too much on me. I can't actually get my real job done, which is like if I'm an app developer building the coolest app in the world, whatever it is. And so that's where I see some of the larger companies, like you mentioned, now actually having platform engineering teams. How wide spread do you think it is? And I'll try to actually ask the question in a different way. If I'm a VP of engineering right now listening to this pod, should I have a platform engineering team?
Yes. I mean, now you can always argue, hey, Kaspar has an interest of you having a platform engineering team, but I'm looking at the return on investment of these teams, and it's so large. You can gain so much from this. There's so much inefficiency in these workflows that yes, definitely you should have one. And having a platform engineering team doesn't sounds, more costly if you want than it is. Take a product manager half-time if you want, but structure this correctly. Structure this as a product. Find a couple of people that are responsible for this. Take them from different groups. You don't even need to rehire. Apply these principles. Take this on, structure it, and you'll see very, very fast return with fairly low costs. And so, definitely yes. And I want to get back to one of the absolutely correct things you said. We have these fundamentalists shouting at us, everybody has to do everything, context, otherwise you're abstracting people away. And it's this type of thing you can always say. Everybody could always say, they say, never restrict developers, never take away context. Of course not. But that's not the idea. Like platform engineering is not about taking context away. The contrary holds true. It's about providing context. If you're looking at 700 different script formats, that's not context. That's cognitive overload. You don't win anything. And so that is really our industry is the only industry that is not actually driving towards specialization. Since medieval ages to now, every industry has always specialized. We're the only fucking industry in the world that is actually working against specialization. And where I really have a problem with these fundamentalist approaches or viewpoints is that many of them just have never really worked at scale. And scale for me means production grade 250, 300, 400, 500 engineers over a longer period of time. And to believe that in these situations, you can just shift everything to everybody is so insanely naive. And then the next argument I always hear is hey, you build it, you run it, Werner Vogel said so. I mean, let's pause and look at the situation where Werner Vogel said that. He said that in a blog post, 2006. That guy was in the CTO position he was director of research for 12 months. Before, he was a researcher. That guy had never worked at scale. And Amazon's teams at that point were a couple dozen developers. The sentence that this guy said in 2006 says nothing about the reality of a bank in US East with 2,500 developers that's drowning in policy. It's just naive to say that. It doesn't make sense.
Yes, I think sometimes as an industry, we latch on to a few sentences that someone says and then try to apply it to all situations. We could probably do a full podcast alone on just why this thing of saying, hey, developers can do everything is a good move. Maybe it's because they're super smart people, most of the time. Maybe it's because the business says I can drive costs down if I have a few developers. I don't have to hire as many people. There's probably a lot of reasons. But yeah, I mean, we know at scale, like specialization obviously does help, and it's like around finding the balance. A lot of people are thinking, okay, like what is this platform engineering thing? Should I start a team? And they might be saying, hey, I have a thing called DevOps. I have people, DevOps was kind of a movement, but at the end of the day, like you might be thinking, I have a few people on my team that I consider to like be in the world of DevOps. I have a few people on my team. Maybe you're following an SRE type model. Are these the same people that take on behaviors of a platform engineering team, or is it different people, or how would you describe that?
The SREs are responsible for making sure stuff runs well, right? And that remains that specialization. That
Like still
I
need
don't
that.
think
Still need
we need
that.
that.
Yeah. Okay. So
Exactly.
let's
Right.
like
That
put
shouldn't.
a checkbox there. SRE, you're saying, hey, they're responsible for like reliability in production, all of that. I think what you're saying is don't pull those people away. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Like
Now,
100%.
let's
Same
say
thing, infrastructure.
I have like DevOps style people that maybe specialize in like pipeline optimization, or that's what they're maybe came into the field and are passionate about. How do you feel about DevOps and platform engineering?
Right. And this is where, again, the fundamentalists, if we would be sitting here and we would have a fundamentalist, the fundamentalist would say, hey, DevOps is not a role, right? I don't know how often I hit that sentence. Okay, I get it. DevOps is not a role. DevOps is a philosophy. Congratulations. So you can keep a couple of people that shout that philosophy 3 times a day, right? But we need people that actually do stuff. We need the guys that go in and do the pipelines and that go in and do stuff, right? And DevOps is a philosophy. Check. I don't want to change that. Great philosophy. And platform engineering is the practice. And I think what we're advertising for is that you need a product mindset. And because there's always the question like, how do I get an internal developer platform? And my answer is always like, you have one. If you have your shitty Jenkins scripts everywhere and everything is all over the place, you have a platform. And like, it's a horrible platform. Like it doesn't work. It's a pain in the ass for your developers. Terrible, right? But it is a platform. And so what we're advertising for is to say like, you have to apply product principles. You have to apply certain design principles, golden paths over cages, standardization by design, dynamic versus static configuration management, a lot of these design principles, apply them and actually take control of your platform and treat it as a product. And then you're a platform engineering team. That's it.
Yeah, yeah. What I've seen is a lot of people that are on platform engineering teams and they call themselves that, they might have come from this DevOps background.
Yeah.
I don't really, I mean, I've heard, of course, it's a philosophy, putting together empathy and automation and all of that, which is great. But a lot of those people do have the same skills. What I do see when I interview them or talk to like a platform engineer, you brought up product for example, they seem to have a great product understanding that their users are engineers within their organization. And they all seem to have a mission really to want to help make those engineers more efficient, reduce the load, remove all the shit that they don't want to be doing, or like they still have that automation mindset. They can code. Usually, sometimes they're like former developers back in whatever. But I think the most important thing is like they're really putting that internal engineer as their like end user that they really care about. They do measure pipelines. They do want to be more efficient. That might be like part of the role. But I would just say that like everyone listening, like you probably have these platform engineers on your team today. They're pretty easy to identify if you just ask a few questions. And it's more, I think it's more just about like enabling them more like tactically, set the right goals, mission. That's
Give
what
them
I've
budget. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so that's the thing, right? I think we're just caught a little bit in these things because there's so many people in these organizations, as you say, right, that they want to make a difference and they're really fighting every day for their users, and they are frustrated if their developers are frustrated, and you want to enable these teams. And what for me is a constant source of frustration, I'm seeing it so much in the market, is that the management layers of many, many engineering organizations just say, oh yeah, we can reduce a little more from the operation teams, and we can reduce a little more from the platform groups, and all of the budget is shifted to the application developers. And that makes so little sense. That's so harmful, right? And I know the most absurd stories of large banks that don't, hundreds of core banking applications, and you have 3-4 full-time equivalents working on keeping the lights on from an operational perspective. And if you think about the hidden costs of that, right? Unproductive application developers, huge security risks, key man dependencies, all of that thing. And we need to change that mindset.
Projects will be delivered not on time or more not on time. You'll actually end up spending more money. Yeah, it's kind of just like a mindset shift for the business to understand, like, if we invest like more foundationally into the platform, we'll actually get more return. I want to move us. There was something like, I have it in my notes here, an eye-catching slogan. I think it might be on your website or something that you said. It's like a DevOps as debt. Can you explain, what does that mean?
Yeah, so this was, somebody wrote that. I don't even recall, somebody on Twitter, I think. And then our team picked it up and wrote it until it was there. We went to KubeCon, we printed it on T-shirts, and people were really, really, really angry. It's see like a crazy distribution. It's still now like if there's always this last influencer that needs a post, and then they'll go to LinkedIn and talk about again why DevOps isn't dead. I think, why did we do that? Because we wanted to have this conversation, because no, DevOps is not dead. But again, DevOps is a philosophy and not a practice. That is the difference. DevOps is the philosophy platform. Engineering is the practice. We just wanted to make clear again that if you abuse this idea of you build it, you run it, you harm people because they cannot do their job, the job that they're actually signed off for. It's incredibly frustrating. They wait, they're overloaded. It's just from a mental health perspective, not very fair. And so I think, yes, to a certain degree, in many, many large organizations, frankly, DevOps and this approach has failed, and it's time to fix that.
Mm-hmm. And when you're seeing, because one of the things that is coming up a bit in this conversation is some of these statements, you have to have the context of like where you are as a company. So you keep talking about the difference between like large organizations versus like 14 engineers working on something new. A lot of people that listen to our pod, like maybe they got like a Series B round of funding, Series C round of funding, like rapid scale. I know that we didn't like fully break into this, but like small team, medium size, like high growth team, like huge bank. Can you say anything about the differences of where some of the stuff should apply or not apply and how between those different style engineering organizations?
Yeah, totally. And I think you're hinting at a good point here. We need to be way more granular because like this is a huge industry, right? Like you need different tools for different things. I'm always stunned, like removing billions. If you look at a car manufacturing plant, they have an incredible number of different tools for different things. And obviously nobody would question that. In comparison to that, and if you put it into comparison to the amount of money we move through the digital economy, we have a small number of tools, right? And we're still building these digital factories for developers to a certain degree, right? And they look different and they have different tools and they have different needs. And that's exactly it. We need to differentiate, and which is like why it's so dangerous to take things out of context. And if you're listening to me, if I'm speaking about platform engineering, I'm speaking about organizations of 50 plus developers on the lower end, right? And can you maybe apply it on the low end? Yeah, maybe, but the return on investment profile is probably not there because you have, if you are 20 developers, small team, everybody knows everybody, you know all of the services, you know all of the clusters. And you think about, your early days in your last engineering organization, you know exactly, hey, this guy is responsible for this service. I know how this connects to this. I know because I know where to go, where to fix this. And so if you introduce more process and you introduce more barriers, you reduce the productivity. So it's not a very good idea. in these situations to build complex platforms, period. You should have scrappy scripts to a certain degree, right? You should hack things together. That's totally fine. But if you're 200 people and you're growing to 300 people, that just doesn't scale anymore because you have a communication problem. You have a script creep problem, and you need to take control of that. So if I speak about platform engineering, I'm talking enterprise scale, couple hundred developers that need to, serve a global user base, or like it's a scale up, Series B plus. It's probably where you should start looking at this. And so there is actually a certain risk that you're applying this too early, because then you're lowering productivity. There's a certain risk that you can actually lower productivity.
That's the art of it. We usually talk about scale ups. I think you mentioned that terminology. That's where you really start thinking about, okay, I can get a really good return on investment if I start automating my pipeline, if I start thinking about having, a platform like the service, we'll get into it, but like the services you provide. If I start thinking even about like how much time developers are like wasting in meetings. But the thing about it is, usually, let's say that you have 30 to 50 engineers, but you have a mandate that you're going to double the engineering team. So now you're going to be like 70 to 125. And what I see, again, for people listening in this situation, there's the art of starting at the right time to get the right ROI, because it gets more difficult if like you double the size of your software engineering team, you have 100, 125 people. It's also hard to go back and say, oh shit, like we're behind. We have to like redo, like, okay, let's form this platform engineering team. Let's do an analysis of what we need to improve. Now we're behind. We also have features that we have to deliver. Usually in that situation, there's pressure from the CEO of the business to deliver on time. So all I would say is like, yeah, maybe if you have like 10 or less or 15 or 20 or less developers, you might not get the most return. But if you have 30 to 50 and you know that you're going to be doubling your team size, things are going well, start thinking about it, because then it's kind of like that right time. That's the art behind it. It's the right timing.
Correct. And if you think about like a rule of thumb for me is, if you have, let's say, 10 developers on every full-time equivalent operations person, and then you double this to 20, and you probably need 2 operations people, or like, give them whatever your name you want. And then you're going to 50. Now, maybe you need 5, but at this point you should already, the relationship should reduce. But then you're going from 50 to 100, you shouldn't need 10, right? Like the number of people you need to actually control the systems cannot grow linearly with the amount of application developers. If you're doing that, then you have a pretty ineffective procedure and system, because then you have a lot of communication strings between this. It's like a great way of measuring whether you have a problem is look at, do you have ticket ops? Like how many tickets do you actually write from the developers to requests of operations because they're stuck with something? And to give you a great example, we just worked with this bank out of Brazil, I think. They had 50 GCP projects that created 1,000 tickets where developers were overwhelmed and asked operations something. Now they had a mandate to go to 500 GCP projects. They were expecting to scale to 10,000 tickets. Like that's the size. Yeah, it's nuts. Like that's the size of a small service shop. This is crazy.
Yeah. You can see it in tickets. The way that we see it at Linear B, you can just like measure your pipeline, and you'll see that developers are spending more time actually not merging code and like doing other. You can like see it in the data. You can see it in the data of tickets. There's actually like a lot of ways to visualize it. And I think like the moral of the story that we're saying here is like, make sure that you're identifying these inflection points, let's call them, to get ahead of the game. Because if you're having a really long cycle time, or you're having lots and lots of tickets, it's just hard to catch up if you get too far behind. Now
it's draining.
I think you like in the beginning of our talk, you mentioned a conference, right? Like Platform Con or like something like that. And we know there's like a ton of DevOps conferences. If you probably added them all up all over the world, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people attending. And there are some topics that are like reoccurring. I'm kind of moving us to like a standardization. Have you seen any standards come out in platform engineering or like references?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're seeing a lot of standardization in the way we talk about things, which is a good first step. I think too long, and I include myself in that critique, we've been staying on a high level, and we've been talking about, I mean, we've been using buzzwords like golden paths and yada yada yada. And we've not been specific enough in actually saying like, hey, this is how most platforms look. And I can tell you why I wasn't specific enough, right? Because I didn't know better. Yeah, I knew many platforms, but just not a critical mass to say, okay, those are the actual common denominators. Now, maybe since a couple of months, I've seen so many platforms on Amazon or Google or Azure that I can say like, okay, mostly this is how a modern reference architecture for internal developer platforms look. They have, something to measure KPIs. They have an integration layer, CI/CD. They maybe have a platform orchestrator. They maybe have a user interface on the portal, or they're CLI or API based. They have an observability layer. This is how these layers connect with each other. So for the first time, I think we're at a point where we can articulate that. And I spent actually the last week writing a white paper on a reference architecture end to end for internal developer platforms of the stuff that I'm mostly seeing. And that feels relieving because, I myself can actually move beyond the buzzwords.
That's great. I mean, let's maybe we can include like your write up in the notes if it's ready or something like that. But you're one of the founders at Humanitec. Is there three founders, right?
Three. Yeah.
Three. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about Humanitec. Like, what's going on at your company?
Humanitec, we were all always working in engineering teams. My co-founder, Chris, was at Google, built one of the platforms there. We took a lot of learnings from these. It was like 2017, 2018. We saw the first ones coming up. We were looking for common denominators. And our analysis was, well, you can't build an out-of-the-box internal developer platform because the platform is really subject to the organization. We always say like a great platform is basically the culture of an organization as a tool to a certain degree, right? Because what's your security posture? How do you deal with things? What's your level of abstraction? That's a very, very organizational specific decision that you're making every time. And so we said, okay, it doesn't make sense to copy Heroku. This is a completely different market. You have those platform as a service market. That's fine. Has a value, makes a lot of sense, but not for an enterprise. We want to enable the builders. We want to enable the platform engineers that are building platforms, and we want to help them with best practices. So we do a lot of education. We also want to help them with specific products. And we have 3 products. And platform engineers use these products to take the existing CI/CD flow that's static and turn it into what we refer to a dynamic internal developer platform. Dynamic hints at the approach to configuration management. We believe that the config layer is a big driver to unify interfaces, to actually drive platform engineering. Those 3 products, number 1 is an open source product called Score. It's a workload specification, which has seen a good reach, I think over 7,500 stars by now. And it's a way for developers to basically describe what their workload needs in an abstract way in general. So in a workload specification, you would say like, hey, I have a workload. It's called Dan workload. And it depends on a database of type Postgres, on an S3 bucket, and on a DNS. Yep. And you would keep it as high level. You wouldn't say that particular database in an RDS instance. So you would say like a database of type Postgres. And by the way, this is a connection string that tells my workload how to connect to that database. So this is product number 1, basically a unified interface for developers to describe what they need. Product number 2, core product, is the platform orchestrator. And as the name suggests, it's orchestrating platforms. You plug it in after CI, and it basically reads that recipe of the developer and turns that into, hey, this is what I like. You asked me for a Postgres. Here you go. This is the Postgres. And the orchestrator will basically receive that request, match it with the defaults that the platform engineering team sets, and then creates application configurations, and it then wires existing infrastructure components, or it creates new ones, right? You can think of this like a context-aware configuration file generator. That orchestrator can also actually deploy, but it can just hand over to his dedicated CD engine like Argo. And the third product are drivers. They're again open source, and you can think of them like glue to a certain degree. The orchestrator says, hey, I need that particular Postgres. The driver would be able to reach out to the Amazon API and make sure it can get you the credentials for that exact database. But the driver could also work in combination with HashiCorp Cloud or Terraform or Upbound or Crossplane or Pulumi or whatever your favorite script is. And that allows us to actually take these existing CI/CD flows, all our clients are brownfield, and transform them into internal developer platforms. And our orchestrator is, API first, and that means it can also, send data to Linear B, send data to a developer portal for you to visualize what's going on inside the platform, aggregate stuff, do cost analysis, all of these things.
That sounds really cool. Awesome stuff. And
thank you.
Great job helping the community with this. I highly encourage everyone to check this stuff out. What do you think's coming next? You can do it both for Humanitec, but also for the industry of platform engineering.
Yeah, I think next is actually language models. So I think we'll see a big change in that new frontier or the new possibilities that we now have around these approaches. I don't think we're at a point. It's a little bit like the self-driving car problem, right? We're not at a point where we can actually rely on these systems enough to be production grade. So it's not enough where we can say, I need a Postgres, and then a language model figures out to actually how to create the infrastructure as code and then execute. This is for now really like a let's pray there's no pedestrian situation. So we're not there yet. But I think we are coming closer. And one of the big things that I think is going to come is to say, hey, you have this Amazon account right now. It's a mess. Let's actually backwards deduct what's in there, and let's automatically clean it up and standardize. That's a big step already. And so we might not actually get all the way, but we'll get pretty far. And we'll be able to consolidate the situation you have right now into scalable platforms. Not automatically, but we can get you like 80% of the way.
Sounds great. I mean, I think the future's pretty bright for this whole industry and the things that you're doing in Humanitec. If you think about our full conversation today, what is the 1 to 2 things that you'd like our listeners to take away and take home with them?
Well, I think one thing that you said, actually, beware of context. That is so important. If it only because Spotify says something, it doesn't necessarily need to be true. Like a lot of these HR teams of these large companies said a lot of shit over the years that has cost us a lot of time. So, and that includes everything that I'm saying. Make sure you really, really question your sources. Make sure you really think about where I'm coming from, and I'm coming from big enterprise. So that's number one. Number two, it's actually pretty simple. Treat everything as a product. You should treat everything as I think you should treat your marriage as a product, right? You should definitely treat your CI/CD pipeline like a product. Everything should be a product. It makes things better.
That's amazing. That's going to be my number one takeaway. Treat my marriage like a product. I love it. Kaspar, thanks so much for joining the pod today. It's been an awesome conversation.
Thank you so much, then, for having me.
If people want to get started with Humanitec, what's the best way that I can get going trying the product?
Humanitec.com. There's a free trial. There's an article on how to use the workload specification score, that open source description together with the orchestrator. That's a great first start to explore the world of dynamic internal developer platforms. That's probably my best guess.
All right. Thank you so much, Kaspar. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll catch you all next week.